Hey everyone, welcome back to the API series. In today's video, we are going to learn about common commands. In Cypress, by default, we get this common commands.js, which is under your support package. So if you're using Cypress version 10 and above, you will see this commands.js file inside your support package. So what does it mean? What is the purpose of this? So command.js is a file where you can keep all your custom commands or you can keep your common commands. It's like a central repository for your custom commands, and it has many benefits. Like you can reuse the commands which are mentioned over here. For example, there is a method which you are using in every test file. We will be discussing about API call. So let's discuss in terms of API. For example, in API, what are the methods which you perform? You have to perform post, get, delete, put, right? We know these are the methods which we have to perform in every test case, right? So instead of writing this in every test file, we can create a common command in commands.js. So what will be the benefit? The benefit would be you can just write once over here and you can reuse it in every test file, right? So this way you can keep your common command separately from your test file. It ensures your consistent behavior across your test. When you define a command, a custom command in command.js, you can be sure it will be executed in the same way it is used. And in case of maintenance also, it's very easy to maintain since you have to make the changes in single file only. So that's why creating a command in command.js is a helpful way in Cypress. So now today what we will do, so we will perform one end-to-end testing in which we will call our post API, then we will call the get API, then we will update the same resource. After that, we'll delete the same resource. So all the four methods we are going to use in today's video. But for that, I'm not going to use any cy.request command in my it block. So first thing, I will create different commands in my commands.js. So the first command I will use it. Let's create a common command for get call. So there is a syntax which you have to write. So which is Cypress.commands.add. Okay, and then you have to pass the name of that command. Let's say I want to create it for get call. So I will pass it as get API. Okay, after passing the command name, what you have to do, you have to create a callback function with this. So how do we create it? Like this. And now the callback function, you have to write your main. So what is the code in case of get API? How do we perform get call? So we use this command, which is cy.request. So cy.request. So what is the method in case of get call? So we have to write like this. So method is get, right? Method is get, and then we are passing URL. But as we know, this is a common command. We cannot hard code the URL over here, right? If you have created a framework, API would have its own endpoint, right? So it's not a good practice to hard code over here. So in that case, I will pass it like this and I will parameterize it. What does that mean? So by parameterize, I mean this URL I'm going to pass in this parameter. So whenever I will call get API, I can pass the URL with that command. In this case, we are not hard coding the URL, so that everyone can pass their own URL in the get API call. Fine. What is the next step? Next step is our header. We also pass headers in get API. So again, headers I'll pass like this because in your project, maybe other API can have different header. We pass like this. But if you know, like in your project, all the APIs will have common headers, then you can directly pass all the headers over here. So you need to understand how we are parameterizing it, when we are parameterizing it. So we are parameterizing in case of URL because again, the URL will keep on changing based on your APIs. Different APIs will have different endpoint, okay? And headers also will keep on changing. But in case in your project, if the headers are common, you can directly pass the headers over here. You do not need to parameterize it. So this is the call which you have to take based on your project requirement. So this is how we make a get call. And similar thing we will do for post, put and delete also. So let me create common commands for post, put and delete as well. Okay. So next is for the post. So Cypress.commands. Means you have to make sure the syntax should be correct to write in this format only. Okay. Then add. Let me name it as post API. Fine. And now I will create a callback function. So inside the function, in this case, what we will do, in case of post, I will write cy.request, and the method in case of post is post, right? So we'll pass it as post. Next is our URL. Again, I'm going to parameterize it. So URL I will pass in my parameter. Whatever URL you will pass in the command, it will be passed to your function. Okay. Next one is headers. So in post call also we pass headers, and this one also I'm going to parameterize. So let me pass in my parameters the headers. Afterwards, we pass body also. So let me pass it like this. So body, and this is my payload. And payload also we can't hard code because every post request will have its own payload, right? So whenever you create a common function, you need to understand how we can create it. Like if we are creating a common function, so we know this is a post call. Post is a basic thing, right? For post API, method will always be post. But the URL, headers, and body, it can keep on changing based on your request. That's why we have parameterized. Every test call, in every it block, you don't have to write cy.request or you have to write all these things. You just need to pass the URL, headers. Okay. So this is how you create a post API command in commands.js. What is the next step? Now let's create one more command for put call. So Cypress.commands add, will name it as put API. And in this case also, I'm going to create a callback function like this. For this, I will do cy.request. And in this case, what is the method name? In this case, our method name is, we know in case of put call, we have to pass method name as put, and the rest of the things is same. We are passing headers, we are passing the URL. So let me copy from here because this is again same thing. And in the parameters, I will pass it like this, URL and headers. Fine. And now let's create the final one. So final one is delete. So cypress.commands.add, and this is my delete API. So delete API, and now create a callback function for this. So cy.request, and in case of delete, we know the method is delete, right? So it's delete over here, and the rest of the things will be same, URL and headers, right? I'll just copy from here. So again, I'll pass parameters. So URL and headers will be fetching from our test file, right? So these are the common commands which we have written for get, post, put, and delete. You see, this is very simple. Now the benefit is you can just write it once and use it in your test file everywhere. And let's create one test file and then try to use this common commands. Let's see that. So let me go my Cypress folder and end-to-end. Let me create one. I will name it as end-to-end test.cy.js. And let me write the describe block, API automation in Cypress, and the callback function for this. And now we'll create our it block. So in it block, I will name it as using custom command. Now we will take the same example of post API, which we have been using earlier. This is the users API, which we are going to use today itself. So in this API, as we know, this is the API gores.co.in, and in which we have a mandatory header for the bearer token, and we are passing some body. Okay, now let's make the call for this. So we know this is our URL. Let's go back over here. Now I'll not write cy.request and all those stuff. I will just write cy dot, what is the command name? So you go to your command.js, just copy your command name. So let's say this post API is my command name. So cy.post API. And inside this, we have to pass URL, body, and headers, right? So the sequence you should know, URL, headers, and body, because we have mapped in that way. Pass payload first in your command over here. It will be mapped with the headers because the second position is mapped with the headers. Okay. Now, in this, what we have to pass? URL, headers, and payload. So what is the URL? This is our URL, right? So let's go back over here and let's copy the URL. This is our URL. What is the next step? The next step is headers. So in headers, it's an object. So how we are going to pass headers? We are going to pass like this. So we know it is an authorization token. So authorization, and what is the value of the token? We can copy from here in the post call. Guys, if you have not watched the previous video, I have explained how we are getting this bearer token. We have to go to this website gores.co.in, and from there you have to fetch the bearer token. Fine. So this is our bearer token. Okay. So this is done. Next one is our payload. So let me copy the payload. I will create an object over here, and inside this I will pass my payload. This is our payload. We can change the email. Okay. So we have passed URL, we have passed headers. Now we are going to pass body in this case. So that's it. Now we have made the post API call. Now after making the post call, what you can do? You can make one assertion also. Okay. So for assertion, what we will do? First, we will save our response and we'll create a callback. So this is, now we have got the response. This is after making a post call, your response will be stored here. And then we can write assertion using expect. We will say response dot status, and let's find. Now we have made a post call. After making a post call, what we can do? Let's make a put call to update the user. Fine. So inside this, I will call Earlier we were calling cy.request put all the code we were writing over here. But now in this case, I'm just going to use cy.put API. So where is this put API coming from? So this put API is coming from our commands.js. You see this put API. Fine. And in put API, what you have to do? You have to pass URL and headers. That's it. So in this case, first of all, we know in case of put API, we have to pass the URL, and in the URL, we have to pass resource information also. So in order to get the resource information, we will create a variable over here. Let's store the user ID, which we get from the post call. So let me store it. So let's user ID. What is our user ID? So we are getting user ID from response.body.id. So this user ID we are getting from the post call. Fine. So now we have the user ID. And in case of put API, I'm going to pass first is my URL. So our URL, if I show you in the Postman, so the URL is like this, right? We have the base URL till users, and then we are going to pass the user ID also. So let me pass like this. And over here, I'll be passing user ID because this is a path parameter and it keeps on changing for every user. We are not hard coding over here. So the best practice is when you're performing end-to-end testing, you should do inside the flow in such a way, create a resource, update the resource, delete the resource. So this is our whole flow. After the user ID, what we are going to pass? We are going to pass headers, and that's it. So if you see in over here, we are URL and headers. Fine. So headers, let me copy the header from here. So this is my header. So let's paste the header. Now we have got our put call. After making the put call, we will verify if our response is 200 or not. So response, and inside this, we'll write an assertion. So expect, we need to assert response.status is 200 or not. So to be equal 200. Fine. Now we have made put call also. But you see, there is one more repetition. We can see over here, we are doing authorization. The bearer token is getting repeated. Okay. So in this case, our bearer token is getting repeated. What we can do, if in your project, you have the same headers which are getting used in every API call, you can add this also in your command.js. In order to avoid this one, the repetition of same code, I will just cut the header from here and let me go to my command.js. So in all my headers, I will pass my headers like this. So I'll remove from the parameter. Why I'm using it? Because now I can see the authorization, the bearer token, it is getting used in every it block, in every test case. But this might not be the case for you. In case of your headers, you might need to pass headers like this. You understood? That's why I try to show you first by passing the parameters, and we are passing headers in our command.js. So I'll write like this. I'll remove headers from here. Wherever you see the repeated code, just try to make in such a way we are not repeating the same line of code again and again. Wherever you see, it's not for only API calls, it can be on web case also, right? When you're performing web automation, you see one code which is getting repeated again and again, you can just go and create a common function. So that is a good approach, and that is the basic thing which an automation engineer should have. So you should create common commands, you should create some wrapper. So now if we go to our end-to-end, we will not write headers over here. So this is again, we are removing our one more layer. We are not writing header. You see, now our code is looking more cleaner. Now we have made the post call. Now let's delete this user. So for delete user, we have created delete API, so cy.delete API. So when you create a command in command.js, in order to access that, what you have to do, you have to use cy.the command name. So whatever is the command name, you have to pass like this. Like we pass cy.post API, put API, delete API. So that's why whatever command you will create, you have to use this name, right? So delete API and delete API, what are we passing? We are passing the URL because we have to delete a resource. So it will be similar to what we have in put API, right? Because in delete API also, we are deleting a user. So if I show you in the Postman, so you see, this is V2 users, and then we are passing the user ID. Same thing we are doing over here. So this is V2 users, and we are passing the user ID. But in this case, I'm expecting a different response code. Like we saw in the previous video, in case of delete, we are expecting the response code to be 204, which means successful, but no content. Just expect response dot status equal This is 204. So now we have done, we have created user, we have updated user, we are trying to delete the user. In case of post, let me change the ID. It should be 201, not 200, because this is a created. Let me run the test case and let's see if the user is getting created, updated, and deleted. Let's run the test case. So we'll run it from here. Our file name is end-to-end.js. Let's run it. So you see our test case got passed. We have post call, we have added the assertion, then we have the put call, then we have the delete call. Okay, so everything is working fine over here. If you want to add API call for get call, we can do that also. So let's add one more layer over here for get call as well. So I'll write over here cbar.get API. What we are doing, if you go to command.js, we can see we are just passing one parameter, which is your URL. So let's pass the URL. And the URL, how we are fetching the URL? The same way, we are getting users and then we are passing the user ID. So we can copy till here. This is my base URL, right? Base URL, and then we have to pass the path parameter, right? So in case of path parameter, I'm passing my / and then we are passing the user ID. This is our end-to-end flow. And in this case, I'm expecting the response status to be 200. Trying to fetch a user which is already present in the database, right? Why? Because we already created a user. That's why we are trying to fetch the same user. Otherwise, if we are passing the user ID over here, if we are hard coding it, and if the user ID does not exist, it will throw an error. So for making end-to-end testing, you need to pass it like this. First of all, post call, get call, put, and delete, right? In the assertion, what we will do, we will verify the response status. So response status, we are expecting it to be 200 in this case. Now you see how much cleaner your code looks, right? So we are not passing everything over here like we were doing in delete user. You see, all the cvar.request, headers, URL, we are performing everything in the test file. But in case of this one, the code looks so much cleaner, right? So let's run the test case for this and let's see. So npx Cypress open, go to your terminal, enter this command, then select your test file. So this is my end-to-end test. Let's run it. So you see, the test is getting passed. We are making all the 4 calls. We are making post call, get call, put call, and delete call. All the assertions are also working fine. Okay. There's one more thing which I can see which is getting repeated. What is that? We can see our URL. So this is also something which is getting repeated. So in this case, what we can do, in this case, we can hard code our URL also. Fine. So how you can hard code the URL? There are 2 ways. You can either pass in your command.js over here, you can pass the URL, or you can pass the URL in your config.js. So we'll see both the methods. Let's just pass in the command.js. In your project, if your base endpoint is same, you can do it this way. But if it is not same, then you should not do it. You should know how to perform in both the ways. Framework and endpoints are different, right? So you should not be hard coding in commands.js. In case if your base URL is common, you can pass it in your commands.js. That is one of the approach. Pass this in the commands.js. So in all our URL, we will pass like this. Okay, but there's a catch. In get API, like we discussed, we are passing path parameter. So I will pass like this. This is my users, and over here, this is our path parameter. So in this case, path param, because it's like this, path parameter, right? Similar thing, we will pass the same URL and path parameter in our other calls also. So in case of post, what is the URL? The URL is until users, right? Until users, right? So in this case, we will remove the URL. We are not passing any path parameters, so we don't need to pass it in the parameters over here, right? And in case of put also, what we do, we pass it as a path parameter along with the base URL. I will just pass path param. Okay, I will remove the extra comma from here. This is my path param. And similar thing we will do for our delete call as well. So in delete call also, with the URL, we are going to pass like this, the path param, and path parameter will pass in our URL. Fine. Now let's go to our end-to-end, and we will not pass URL in case of post. In case of get, we are just going to pass the user ID. We are going to pass the user ID like this. So with the user ID, like this is a path param, you have to pass the / also, right? User ID, or The other approach is you can pass it in your request like this, right? If you pass it in the request, you will not have to pass the path parameter, the forward slash in your commands. So let me pass directly over here, right? So this is our delete, and in case of get also. Okay. So now let's go over here. We will remove this one. And in case of put API also, I'll remove this. I'll just pass my path parameter, which is user ID. And in case of delete also. Okay. Now you see, now this is looking more cleaner. Now let's run the test case and let's see in this case how it is working. Now in take Cypress open and then your test file, which is end-to-end test. If I run it, so you see in this case also, this is getting passed. Our URL, it is getting fetched from the command.js. Fine. But like I told you, this is also not a very good approach, because hard coding the URL in command.js, this is we can do it, but this is again not the good approach. So what we should be doing, we should be passing our URL in our config.js. So go to Cypress.config.js, and in this case, what you have to do, in case of end-to-end, you have to pass base URL. And what is the base URL? This is our base URL. Okay. Now you have to make sure, in this case, you have to make sure the base URL, whatever you're passing, is the base URL we are using in our request, right? This is our base URL. For all the APIs, we are passing till users, right? V2 users. That's why I passed base URL over here. But for this, you have to make some adjustments in your command.js, right? Because in command.js, we were passing the URL like this. So now if we go to your commands.js, what we will do, we'll remove this and we'll pass like this. See? And we just have to pass one forward slash in our URL. You don't have to pass whole URL, just pass one forward slash, and automatically it is going to pick from the Cypress.config.js. Now, if we go back to our file, which is end-to-end test.cy.js, so we are not going to make any changes over here, right? We will run our test case. So let's run the test case again. In this case, we have removed the URL. We are this using forward slash. That means the URL is coming from our config.js, which is this one, right? In order to fetch this URL in Cypress, what happens if you define your base URL in your Cypress.config.js? In order to use it, in case of API, you have to pass like this, and in case of web also, with the cy.visit command, you have to pass like this. That means the forward slash is referring to this URL, base URL, which is there in Cypress.config.js. Fine. Now let's run the test case and let's see if it is working fine or not. So in takes Cypress open, end-to-end testing, and end-to-end user. So now you see, in this case also, our API is working fine as expected. We are not hard coding the URL. We are not hard coding the user ID. Awesome. This is really amazing. And these are the benefits which Cypress offers you. Because in case of other framework, when you create other framework, you have to create common commands, and then you have to create an object of that class and then use it. But in Cypress, you don't have to worry about this. So all the wrapping thing, it's very easy in Cypress. You don't have to worry if you're writing, if there is some common base URL, you just have to pass in your Cypress.config.js and you can easily use it. And for the common commands, you can directly pass in the commands.js. Okay. So this is about command.js, how we can use it, what is the benefit of using command.js, and how we are using files also. Okay, you see, the code is so much cleaner now. If you see the total number of lines, it's just 16 to 27. It's just 11 lines of code. Whereas in the earlier test file, if you see delete user, you see this is such a big file. For single call only, it was around 10 lines of code. But now with the 11 lines of code, you are calling 4 different APIs. Do you see the difference? If you want to be a good automation engineer, you should think about optimizing your code. You should think about creating some common commands and how it can be beneficial, right? So yeah, that's it for the video. I hope you like it. And if you're not following such approach in your product, try to follow these kind of approaches. Try to create common functions wherever you can create it. Wherever you see same line of code getting repeated, you should create some common functions for that. And in Cypress, you can do it easily. You don't have to worry about creating objects of the class or using it. You just have to create a command in your commands.js. And in order to access that, what you have to do? you have to use cy.command name, like we are using over here, cy.command name. You see, these are all commands which we have created in our commands.js. So if you have any query, just add the comment and I'll try to reply you back. And I'll keep posting more videos on API automation in Cypress. Fine. And please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.